This is making me so happy. I mean, I know this is a bittersweet occasion for all of us, but for me at this moment, it's just sweet. I could introduce every single one of you and tell everybody what you've brought to my life. But I think I have to restrict myself to thanking the family and friends who have helped to put together this little event. So, my husband Michael, who is always there for me, Jake Moreland, a new and dear friend, Pamela Gifford, Solveig de Sutter, JP, who most of you know, and his sisters, Marilyn and Kathy. So I can just feel so much love in this room. Do you know the ceiling is usually flat? And with all this love, it's just vaulted. So thank you for coming. This is making me very happy. So, no matter how many years we have left to us in Cambridge, there is just no way I could collect a wonderful group of people like you. So that's why it's so important to me to keep in touch. And I'll just mention ahead of time that there are going to be a couple of clipboards circulating, so you can let us know if you want to keep in touch and what would be the easiest way for you, and contact information. So I imagine that many of you were probably surprised to be invited to a poetry reading because you don't think of me as a poet. I know many of you have come to book launches, and some of you know that my writing is often kind of prose poetry. But in terms of poetry itself, it's really been a strand that has run through my whole life as long as I can remember. And I'd like to recite my first poem from 4th grade. Washington was big and bold. He wanted freedom to have and hold. Wealth is very nice, he said, but this fine country must be led. He spent a winter at Valley Forge. He wouldn't be strong if it weren't for George. You'll be happy to know that my subject matter and tone and so forth has evolved over the years. But I have no real credentials at all as a poet. But it's something that I've always done kind of between art and writing projects. And I had some very good fortune in that Donald Hall, who eventually was our poet laureate, the National Poet Laureate, was having he was a poet in residence in Ann Arbor, and so I took a couple of classes from him. Then, when I was about 50, just to jump ahead a little, I sent him a copy of Legacy of Shadows, which was pretty much written in prose poetry. And he was very supportive. And I went to visit him at his farm in New Hampshire and brought some poetry. And so then for a couple of years after that, we had a long-distance mentorship, and I would send him 2 or 3 or 4 poems at a time. He would use his dictaphone, and he had a typist who would type long letters of critique to back, and we went back and forth for quite some time. So I learned an awful lot from him. What I'm going to read from is called a chapbook, and I printed up one for every family. I couldn't do it one for every person, but for every family. It's called Hourglass because many of my poems have had to do with the passage of time over years, and I have a big notebook of poems, and I was flipping through and picking out ones that particularly related to the passage of time, and I wasn't counting as I was doing this, and so it gave JP and me quite a kick to find that I'd picked out 24. So don't worry, I'm not going to read 24 poems to you. So I turned it over to JP to select which ones he thought that I should read to you. So when you leave, don't forget, if you'd like to have one for your family, to take a copy. But when I've told a few people that I was doing a chapbook, I get these really blank faces, and it struck me so funny because when I was going to school in Ann Arbor, and I was in the creative writing department and English department, it was just a commonly used word, and the way it was defined to us then was just a short collection of poems, often one that would come out before a poet had enough for a full book, or even sometimes a chapbook would come out between books. And, it had a very favorable, connotation. But since I got so many blank looks from people, I looked it up, and it turns out that there are many meanings to the word chapbook, and going back to the 1600s. And so a chapbook might have been, a political screed. It might have been a sort of commercial sales thing. It might have just been something that someone thought everybody should read and passed it out. So I'm just trying to resurrect the term chapbook in its literary sense. So this is called Hourglass, and here's the one that Michael gave to me several years ago that I used when I was meditating. Hourglass. The poignancy is not in the rapid stream, but in the roiling grains just above the tightening, as if to resist the gravity of falling into the past, each fights to be last. This is one for Michael. It's called How Like. A night cloud skims along the ground, swells over damp mulch, whirls around the hub of us. Faint strokes of fence, a streak of road are inference. What must be tires along the asphalt slur. Between your lips and mine, though, words spring luminous in vapor coils. When car light glances off the fog, it spots your eyes. I watch the strobe of every blink. Each iris glints its 1,000 particles of lapis blue. How like the year stunned love called you, this vivid from a world as blurred. The next one is called Expectant Father. Salve for your envy. Our good nights embraced the round sound of metal lid turning on threaded glass, the glup of a stiff dollop dug from the jar, that sour sweet smell as you swirled lanolin circles, murmured to our hidden one. We were concentric then, deep inside the orbit of your palm, deep within my glistening skin, our center turning and turning. The hour of our birth. Each of us pushed through a passage taut as an hourglass, conceived in circumstances multitudinous as the grains above the cinch, destinies heaped like sand beneath. The breathless descent alone in common. Who catches us makes the difference. And this is New Mother Blues. That first time, she didn't know she'd heard her infant's night cry until the chill of her camisole woke her, soaked with her answer. More startling still, her body weeps at the tremors of strangers, the quiet mewling of a shoeless man. Tonight, she leans at the kitchen window. From rowdy streets, she sieves the night cries of longing. Quicker than thought, compassion liquefies, spills past what had been her boundaries. She presses forehead to window screen, wishes her baby would wake with his quenchable needs. Ice Day. The Centennial Post Office across the street can't recall a day like this one, freezing and blazing in cellophane. Crab apples faceted like garnets, the Kentucky coffee tree glistering. Could this be the day? The midpoint of my life? Then let it freeze here. My father's dead, but couldn't I keep the others? The wish is all it takes. A slithering car halts. The wind stops rocking the porcelain hedges. A drop suspends itself, rigid as crystal, from the hinge of the nursery window. And then a twig cracks under its weight. No, here at my feet, it is my toddler snapping Legos, who startles the shards from the power line and makes the baby fall. Accomplished. Now we're skipping ahead a bit in time. Most of us will be able to relate somehow to this, I think. Accomplished. She jiggles a postage stamp to her lips. I watch the hand that hammered sterling bowls from discs, stippled landscapes, threaded the loom for damask at 60 fibers to the inch. her hand that crushed flawed drawings and ripped the imperfect stitch, how it drives the unruly stamp to a faulty landing. I shut my eyes, foreseeing her rage, open them to find her hand caressing the crooked stamp as a work accomplished. I'm awfully glad we're not serving that as punch. Mother's milk. While she is dying a soft death, like the snow's accumulation, I touch a wooden spoon to the sheen on steaming scalded milk, and its skin corrugates and clings. The sheen that coruscates on the back of mother's hand is the skin on warm milk, cooling. Culling the photos. This is one that I wrote in the last few months since we started the process of moving on and moving out. Culling the photos, not to leave thousands of them for our son to deal with. I deconstruct album after album and packets never before culled, relearning that life is long and less is more. Images bleached in memory brighten, since even photos painfully tossed pass before my eyes one last time. With memory refreshed and compressed, decades are folding tight as a pleated fan. How dazzling to discover I can open it at will with a flick of my wrist. It's just one more, and it's the longest I've read. It will maybe help explain a little bit more about our move to some of you. Dismantling paradise. Our Brazilian guest in the tiny cottage behind our house revels in the greenery brightened with urns of flowers shaded by the catalpa towering and in bloom, and asks, "How can you leave this paradise?" I can only smile achingly and mull her question. The cottage and the shady yard and the little Tudor house I've dwelled in half a century all need someone else other than myself to name them paradise. Yet I have no impulse to correct her. How can we leave all this when it's exactly as we've shaped it, when it's replete with emotional history, once the container of unbridled idealism turned into madness, reworked painstakingly to health, to capaciousness, one kind of love giving over to another, accommodating both, accommodating a little family, a little studio, a life of art and film and writing. How can we leave it? Why would we leave it now? Only because we still can still do it thoughtfully, consciously, lovingly, reducing its contents to what we can afford to ship across the ocean. We leave it because it affords the last chance to cull it all before we die, reliving what we choose to take and what we don't. I sift through more than one lifetime of creations, crafted by relations' hands, which I see more clearly than their faces. I exact some wonder from my own unfinished works as I abridge them. A series of cells from toddling reanimates our son's first steps. I feel the satin glide of pencil on frosted acetate, the reluctant receptivity of watercolor on treated cells. And behold, his wobbly steps come toward me, reminding me of the engine of our intent, to be near this grown man and his loved one who've lived so long across the sea. I just want to remind you, there are a couple of clipboards around. I think there's one in here and one in the living room for you to let us know if you want to keep in touch and what your favorite method would be, and your contact information. Before you go, please take, if you would like, a chapbook for your family. JP, do you want to tell your story about what's happening now?
What's happening now? What do you mean?
Oh, your move.
Oh, so I live in Brazil most of the time, but then the Moats family let me live in the little house. And then, what did they do? They went and reformed it and turned it into a palace, an absolute gorgeous palace. It's a palace. It's a beautiful palace. And I had so much fun living in there. It's just, I can't tell you, it's the best place. But anyway, now Iolani, my wife, and I, Brazilian wife, we're going to move from Brazil to Portugal. We'll see if it works or not. She's anxious to make 5 times more money than she can in Brazil. She's a nurse, and so hopefully the cost of living isn't five times more. Anyway, so I'm leaving in like 3 or 4 days, going back to Brazil and then going to Portugal. So I had to close out the little house completely, and I have a bunch of things on the porch that you can take home if you want to, like storage units, file cabinet, binoculars, bubble bath. So anyway, anybody wants anything, they can just go out and check it out on the little house porch.
Is the half jar of peanut butter still there?
No, that was taken instantly.
And most of you know that used to be our animation studio, the cottage.
Is Lillian a pretty good poet? What do you think?
My chief booster. And thank you so much for coming. I just can't tell you what this is doing for me. Oh, good. Thank you, tears. They've been stuck, and I've been afraid that they'd come out, while I was reading the poems, but no, they've kindly waited until now. Thank you.